Richard Parker glanced at his watch. 9:30 p.m. sharp, just like every other night for the past 11 years. That was the moment he poured himself a glass of 25-year-old Macallan and sank into his Italian leather chair facing the cold, silent stone fireplace. The ritual hadn't changed, not once. It was a quiet celebration of a life he had rebuilt, free from chaos, free from questions, free since the night he buried Eliza. His house in Westlake Hills, tucked behind gates and shaded by tall oaks, was the pinnacle of wealth and isolation. Marble floors, glass walls, and rich mahogany details stretched across 5,000 square feet. But the space rang hollow. There was no one to share it with, and that was precisely the point. After Eliza vanished, Richard sold their shared condo downtown and disappeared into a new life, a place with no ghosts, no memories of the night she had calmly told him she was leaving, for someone younger, more alive. He hadn't planned it, not exactly, but his hands moved faster than his thoughts, locking around her throat before he even registered what he was doing. It had taken minutes. Afterward, he'd driven her lifeless body to a long-forgotten construction site and buried her in silence. The police had opened an investigation. 18 months of interviews, suspicion, and dead ends. Detective Carter had always stared at him with quiet disgust whenever their paths crossed at fundraising events. But with no body, there was no case. Now, years later, Parker Financial Group was thriving. He was a fixture in Austin's upper crust, donor to the symphony, board member of the Children's Hospital, a name spoken with respect. No one knew what had really happened behind the closed doors of his marriage. No one knew that Richard Parker was a murderer. He looked at the single photo resting above the fireplace. Eliza, radiant on their wedding day, her 29-year-old smile lighting up the frame beside his then 46-year-old face. She had been the envy of every man in his circle, beautiful, elegant, and in the end a liability. The doorbell rang. It was abrupt, unplanned. No one ever came by without calling. He wasn't expecting packages, and political canvassers didn't usually knock on doors in Westlake Hills. He set down his glass and walked toward the door with a faint limp from his recent knee surgery. A constant reminder that time was catching up to him. At 57, his body had started giving away secrets he preferred to keep hidden. He didn't check the peephole. He should have. He opened the door, and the world fractured. Standing there, bathed in the amber glow of the security lights, was Eliza, the woman he had killed. The color drained from his face. His knees buckled slightly beneath him. She hadn't changed, at least not much. The same hazel eyes, lined gently with time. Her beauty mark, unchanged. Her voice, soft and melodic, sliced into his panic. "Hello, Richard," she said. "Aren't you going to invite me in?" He couldn't speak, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. He watched her step over the threshold like she belonged there. "You've done well for yourself," she said, glancing around the entryway. She took off her coat and hung it on the rack by the door, her motions fluid, familiar. Richard stood frozen. This couldn't be real. It wasn't possible. She was dead. He'd felt the final breath leave her body. He'd covered her with dirt himself. "You can't be here," he whispered. "Why not?" she replied, tilting her head. "I told you I'd be back tonight. I texted from the airport." She walked past him into the house. The same perfume, peony and blush. Swede drifted after her like a ghost's whisper. He turned to watch her move with ease as if she had never been gone. "I've been in London, remember? Consulting for the Harrison Hotel project," she said, smiling at him like this was any other night. You're dead," he managed to say. Eliza laughed. Not a strange, ghostly sound, but a laugh he remembered well. Slightly throaty, genuinely amused. "What are you talking about?" she said. "You drove me to the airport 2 weeks ago." She moved closer and touched his arm. Her hand was warm, solid, real. "You don't look well," she murmured, pressing her palm to his forehead. "You're ice cold." His mind raced. This had to be a dream, a breakdown, a delusion born of guilt and whiskey. "I'll get you some water," she said, turning toward the kitchen. She moved through the house like she had always lived there. She opened the right cabinet on the first try. "How do you know where the glasses are?" he asked, barely able to get the words out. Eliza looked at him strangely. "What kind of question is that? We've lived here for 6 years, Richard." He stared at her, heart pounding. Everything inside him recoiled. "No," he said, more forcefully now. "I bought this house after you disappeared. You were never here." But she didn't answer. She just stared at him, her expression unreadable, and the house, once a sanctuary of control, suddenly felt like a trap. Eliza's expression shifted. What began as concern morphed just for a second into something sharper, calculating, unfamiliar. A flicker in her eyes that made Richard recoil. Then it was gone, replaced by the same soft worry she'd worn since the moment she walked back into his life. "Richard, you're scaring me," she said gently. "Should we call Dr. Mendez? Maybe it's the new blood pressure meds." She handed him a glass of water. Their fingers touched. It sent a jolt through him, half fear, half something else he couldn't name. He stared at her. "You died," he whispered, his voice dry, barely audible. "I know you died." Her hazel eyes didn't flinch. "Well," she said with a smile that didn't reach the corners of her mouth, "here I am." That night, Richard barricaded himself in the guest room. He pushed a heavy dresser in front of the door and sat on the edge of the bed, gripping a golf club in both hands. Sweat beaded on his skin. On the other side of the wall, he could hear her, Eliza. The sounds of her moving through the house, water running, drawers opening, the creak of floorboards under familiar footsteps. He didn't sleep. How could he? The woman he had buried was here, alive. By the third day, his life had collapsed into a waking nightmare. Each morning, he opened, his eyes hoping it had all been a dream. And each morning she was there, humming a tune he hadn't heard in over a decade, a soft French lullaby she used to sing when they were still pretending to love each other. She moved through the house like she'd never left, wearing his shirts, her bare feet padding across the kitchen tile like they belonged there. "You take your coffee black now?" she asked on the third morning, sliding a mug toward him across the marble island. "You used to insist on cream and 2 sugars." He didn't take the cup. He just stared at her. She was right. He'd stopped adding cream and sugar 8 years ago, long after she was gone. It wasn't something she could have known. "How would you know that?" he asked, his voice tense. Eliza shrugged, sipping from her own cup. "I notice things. I always have. Like how you part your hair on the left, now instead of the right, and that thing you do, tapping your front teeth with your nail when you're anxious." She tapped her fingernail against her tooth. The gesture was perfect, exact. He'd developed the habit 6 years ago, during the merger with Sterling Capital. No one else would have noticed. No one should have noticed. "Don't you want to know where I've been?" she asked, her voice calm, unbothered. His chest tightened. "You haven't been anywhere," he said. "You're dead." "Am I?" she said quietly, stirring her coffee. "How did I die, Richard?" He stood suddenly. The chair screeched against the floor. "Stop this," he snapped. "Whatever sick game you're playing, just stop." She didn't react. Life and death, she mused. Such a thin line. One moment you're here. She snapped her fingers. The sound was sharp, brutal. And the next, buried and forgotten. His knees nearly gave out. He grabbed the counter for balance. "Who are you?" he whispered. "I'm your wife," she answered, her voice steady. "Till death do us part." You took that part very seriously. That afternoon, while Eliza showered upstairs, Richard took photos of everything she'd touched. Her scarf, draped over a chair, her laptop open on the coffee table, her monogrammed notebook, the one she always carried. Proof he wasn't hallucinating. But when he checked the photos, nothing, just empty rooms. The scarf, the laptop, the notebook, they weren't there. Just smudges, like something had blurred them out. Panicked, he waited until she came back downstairs, then snapped a photo of her sitting in his armchair, reading. When he looked again, the chair was empty. Eliza glanced at him. Something wrong. With your phone? You're not showing up in photos, he said, thrusting the screen at her. Look. She took the phone, studied it, then handed it back. I'm right there, she said. He looked again. This time she was visible, clearly, sitting exactly where he'd seen her. The photo had changed. His head throbbed. His hands trembled. He didn't believe in ghosts. Never had. But none of this made sense. Was he losing his mind? Was she doing this? Some twisted manipulation? Or had something gone so wrong in his brain that he could no longer tell what was real? That evening they ate dinner together in near silence. Eliza had cooked, his favorite, coq au vin with truffle mashed potatoes. She got every detail right. Things she couldn't have known. Things only Eliza had known. The doorbell rang mid-meal. He nearly jumped out of his chair. I'll get it, he said quickly, welcoming the interruption. Jameson stood on the porch, his VP at Parker Financial. His expression was tense. Sorry to show up like this, Richard, but you haven't returned any calls. We need your signature on the Singapore documents before midnight. Now's not a good time, Richard said, trying to hide the tension in his voice. Jameson frowned. You okay? You've missed meetings. The board's getting nervous. Everything's fine, Richard said curtly. Send them by courier tomorrow. Just as he tried to close the door, Eliza appeared beside him. Hello, she said, smiling warmly. You must be Jake. Richard's told me so much about you. Richard froze. Jameson's face didn't change, just polite confusion. I don't believe we've met, he said, extending his hand. I'm Jameson. Eliza Parker, she replied, her smile dazzling. Richard's wife. Jameson shook her hand, then turned to Richard with a look of confusion, a question forming in his eyes that neither of them could afford to answer. I didn't realize you had remarried, Richard, and to someone with the same name as your late wife. That's unusual. Jameson's words knocked the air from Richard's lungs. He swayed, cold sweat prickling at the back of his neck. If Jameson could see her, speak to her, shake her hand, then she wasn't just a projection of his guilt. Not a delusion, not a specter visible only to him. She was here. Tangible. Real. It's recent, Richard managed to say, voice tight. Very recent? After Jameson left, visibly unsettled, Richard turned on Eliza the moment the door shut. What the hell was that? He demanded. She looked at him with wide, innocent eyes. What? I was just being friendly. You're not my wife, he growled, stepping toward her. My wife is dead. I don't know who you are or what you want, but this, whatever this is, it ends now. For the first time, her composure cracked. Something sharper surfaced beneath. The pleasant facade, a flicker of ice in her expression, a colder intelligence behind her gaze. Does it end now, Richard? She asked, voice quiet. The way Eliza's life ended. With your hands around her throat, her body dumped like trash. He froze. Her words struck like a blade. Who are you? He whispered. Her smile was tight, joyless. I'm the echo of your past, she said. And I've come to collect. By the 7th day, Richard had retreated into his home office, barricading the door behind him with furniture and a folding chair wedged beneath the knob. He sat hunched over his desk, fingers trembling over the keyboard as he scoured old news, articles, reports of Eliza's disappearance, speculation, opinion columns, prominent businessman's wife missing, foul play suspected. Photos accompanied the headlines. Eliza at charity galas, her arm looped through his, eyes shining with the same confidence that had slowly turned to fear. He moved on to social media, accounts of her friends, her family. Most had gone dormant, or had become digital memorials. He paused on a photo from years ago, Eliza and her younger sister Sarah at a beach. Sarah had only been in his life briefly, plain, quiet, 7 years younger, always watching. During the investigation, she'd made her suspicions clear, but there had been no evidence. Her voice had faded beneath the noise. Now he stared at the photo. There were similarities. The blonde hair, though Sarah's was darker. Similar frame and height. Though Sarah's face had always been rounder, her eyes a different shade, brown, not hazel. Eliza had been in her late 20s when she died. Sarah would have been just 22. The woman in his house was older now. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. But she had Eliza's eyes, her laugh, her voice, the exact cadence, and the scar, small and pale, tucked near her left elbow. From a fall when she was 8. A detail no one could fabricate. A memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp. Eliza standing in their kitchen back when they lived in the condo, telling him she wanted a divorce, that she'd met someone else, someone who didn't treat her like a possession. She had looked him in the eye, trembling, and said, "I know about the money, Richard. I know what you did to those investors, and I won't be part of it." She hadn't just been leaving. She was going to talk, to ruin him. He remembered the feeling of her throat under his palms, how her voice had vanished beneath the pressure, how her eyes had gone wide, not with anger, but with surprise, then panic, then nothing. The silence after her struggle faded had been absolute. Richard swallowed hard, dragging himself back to the present. It wasn't guilt that haunted him. It was the threat, the unraveling. He checked the security footage. Again. Dozens of camera angles throughout the house. She appeared in all of them, cooking, reading, sleeping in the guest bedroom. No glitches, no blurs, nothing paranormal. No obvious manipulation of the phone photos. No trickery he could prove. But he noticed something else. When she thought she was alone, her posture changed. Her face hardened. She moved differently, calculated, precise. At times, she would pause and stare directly into hidden cameras. Cameras he was sure she didn't know about. The way she looked into the lens, it wasn't curiosity, it was awareness. Richard shut the laptop with shaking hands. There was only one place left to go. One thing left to check. The grave. He waited for nightfall, watched through a crack in the office door as Eliza took her nightly bath. Another old habit perfectly reproduced. Once he heard the water running, he slipped out the side door, keys in hand, and drove. The construction site was an hour outside of Austin. 11 years ago, it had been a failed housing development, a victim of the recession. Now it was an overgrown field swallowed by industry, a stretch of forgotten land bordered by warehouses and rusting fences. He parked on a service road, stepping out into the damp night. His shoes sank into the soft earth as he made his way through the weeds. The moon was a dim smear behind a layer of clouds. His phone's flashlight cast narrow beams across the undergrowth. He counted the steps from the old lightning-scarred oak, his landmark back then. 50 paces north, 30 east. The landscape had shifted over time, but the tree still stood, its bark split and blackened. His heart thundered as he reached the spot, the place he remembered so clearly. No marker, no sign. The weeds were tall, undisturbed. The earth showed no sign of having been touched in years. He dropped to his knees, brushing away the overgrowth, ignoring the wet that seeped through his slacks. The earth was undisturbed, packed firm by over a decade of sun, storms, and silence. No signs of recent digging, no disturbances in the overgrowth. If Eliza's body was still here, and it had to be because Richard had buried it himself, then who the hell was the woman living in his house? As he turned to leave, the narrow beam of his flashlight caught something glinting a few feet away. Kneeling down, he brushed aside the dirt. His breath caught in his throat. Half buried in the soil was a silver locket. He recognized it instantly. It had been Eliza's most cherished possession, a family heirloom passed down from her grandmother. Inside, tiny faded photos of her parents. She had been wearing it the night she died. He remembered the way it rested against her skin as he wrapped her body in plastic. He'd buried it with her. He was certain of it. It couldn't be here. Hands trembling, he picked it up. The silver was tarnished but unmistakable. He pried at the clasp, but the hinge snapped, and something small fell into his palm. Not photographs. Piece of folded paper. He unfolded it slowly. Written in fresh, deliberate ink were just 6 words. "I'm waiting for you at home, Richard." The drive back to Austin was a blur of headlights, shaking hands, and rising dread. He barely remembered the roads or the turns. When he pulled into the driveway, his blood turned cold. Every light in the house was on. The windows glowed like an inferno, every room ablaze. He stood at the front door, key in hand. Through the frosted glass panels, two shadows moved inside. Eliza and someone else. He opened the door slowly, tension in every limb. Detective Michael Carter stood in the entryway, leafing through an old case file as casually as if it were any other Tuesday. His suit was still rumpled, his salt and pepper, hair still uncombed, his eyes just as sharp as Richard remembered. The same detective who had led the investigation into Eliza's disappearance. "Mr. Parker," Carter said without looking up. "Nice of you to join us. Your wife and I were just catching up." Eliza stood beside him, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Her eyes followed Richard with a calm that felt like a threat. "What are you doing here?" Richard asked. His voice cracked. "That's a long story," Carter replied, finally meeting his gaze. "Short version, new evidence." Richard's hand went instinctively to his pocket. The locket was still there, heavy and cold. "What evidence?" he asked. Carter gave him a thin smile. "Why don't we sit down and talk it through? Your wife was kind enough to make coffee." Richard followed them into the living room, trying not to show how his eyes scanned every window, every possible escape. His mind reeled. Had they found the grave? No, it was untouched. Had this woman, whoever she was, pressed charges? But on what grounds? He hadn't laid a finger on her. 11 years is a long time, Mr. Parker, Carter said, settling into the armchair. A lot can change. Technology improves. Witnesses come forward. Guilt doesn't stay buried forever. "I don't know what you're talking about," Richard said flatly. Eliza handed him a mug of coffee and took a seat beside Carter, closer than seemed appropriate. Richard noticed the way Carter didn't flinch or react to her presence, unlike Jameson, who had been visibly shaken to see her. "You remember the night Eliza disappeared?" Carter asked. He didn't wait for an answer. "March 15th, 2014. You reported. Her missing 2 days later. Said she left for a spa weekend, never came back." Richard nodded. "That's right. Funny thing about that spa," Carter said, sipping his coffee. "They had no record of her ever booking. None of the spas in the entire region had any record of Eliza Parker that weekend. She must have used a different name," Richard replied. "Too quickly. She did that sometimes to avoid press attention." Carter gave a non-committal shrug. "Sure, but there's more. No credit card activity, no phone calls, no emails. Nothing after 9:42 p.m., the exact time she made her last phone call." Richard felt his skin go clammy. "I don't see how any of that qualifies as new evidence," he said. "The call," Carter said. He leaned forward slightly. "We finally got the full recording. Took years to unearth it. Someone paid a lot to make it disappear back then. But it resurfaced." Richard's mouth went dry. "What call?" "The one to her sister," Carter said. His voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. "She said, and I quote, 'If anything happens to me, Richard is responsible. He knows I found the accounts. He knows I'm leaving.'" The words settled into the room like smoke. Richard didn't remember any call. He'd been so sure they were alone that night. Had she slipped away to the bathroom? Called Sarah before confronting him? "That's not proof of anything," he muttered. "She was upset. People say all kinds of things during fights, during a divorce." "They do," Carter agreed. "But they don't usually vanish afterward." He nodded at Eliza, who reached into her pocket and placed a small recording device on the coffee table. Her hand was steady. "I think it's time we stop pretending," she said. Her voice had changed, subtle but noticeable. There was an edge now, a faint accent, a tone he hadn't heard before. It hit him all at once. The voice, the mannerisms, the way she and Carter interacted with ease, and Carter's complete lack of surprise at her return. "You're working together," he said almost to himself. "You've been working together the whole time." Carter didn't deny it. His expression didn't shift. "Morgan has been very helpful to our investigation." "Morgan," Richard repeated, the word catching in his throat. The woman beside Him nodded. Sarah Morgan. I changed my last name after Eliza disappeared, for obvious reasons. Richard stared. Sarah, Eliza's sister. But it was impossible. She looked exactly like her. The same voice, the same eyes, the same habits, the same private memories only Eliza could have known. He couldn't make sense of it, and still she watched him. Calm, waiting. You're not Sarah, Richard said, voice shaking. Sarah had brown eyes, her face, and she didn't look anything like Eliza. Sarah tilted her head, gently running a hand across her cheek. Modern medicine is a wonder, she said. Colored, lenses, bone contouring, implants, rhinoplasty. 11 years of studying every photo, every voicemail, every word Eliza ever wrote. She gave a cold shrug. Becoming someone else isn't as impossible as you think, especially when that someone is the person you loved most in the world. Richard stared at her in disbelief, in horror. You're insane. No, she replied, quietly. I'm patient, 11 years patient. Watching you live in that house, grow your company, smile in photos, sleep through the night, while my sister lay rotting in an unmarked grave. She leaned forward, and now beneath the skin, beneath the flawless replication of Eliza, Richard saw it. Something crueler, colder, a rage sharpened by time. Did you know I was there that night? She asked. In Austin. I flew in to surprise Eliza for her birthday. I was going to show up at your door with champagne. Richard's chest tightened. Instead, I saw you at 3 a.m., loading something heavy into your trunk. His legs went weak. I followed you, she continued, her voice low. To that construction site. I saw where you buried her. I memorized every turn, every street, every landmark. I was too scared to stop you. You had just killed my sister. If that's true, Richard rasped, why didn't you go to the police? I did, she said, glancing at Carter. But I was a 22-year-old girl with no hard evidence. Just a story and a nightmare. I'd watched from the shadows. Not close, enough to make a clean case. And the cops didn't want a messy accusation without a body. So we made a plan, Carter added. A long-term one. One that required considerable sacrifice on Ms. Morgan's part. But worth it, Sarah said. Her gaze never left Richard's face. To finally watch the truth unravel. To see, drown in it. Richard laughed, short and bitter. You expect me to believe you spent 11 years turning yourself into a ghost? Just to scare me into confessing? Sarah smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Only precision. I didn't become a ghost. I became a mirror. One you couldn't avoid, one that reflected every lie you ever told. She gestured to her face. Every surgery, every hour of voice training, every detail studied and rehearsed. I made myself into the perfect witness, into the victim. So when the truth came for you, it would wear the face you buried. Carter opened a file, laying it on the table. While Sarah was rebuilding Eliza, he said, I was rebuilding the case, finding the cracks, the unreported inconsistencies, the testimonies no one had followed up on. You have nothing, Richard said, but the words were limp, hollow. We have plenty, Carter said. Your old assistant finally came forward. Terminal cancer and a guilty conscience go well together. He remembered everything. The blood on the tiles, the rug you used, the rental car, the things only someone who was there would know. Richard's thoughts spiraled. Marcus. He'd sworn to stay silent, he had promised. He's lying, Richard muttered. No, Carter said, voice flat. He's dying, and he's telling the truth. Sarah leaned in. But that's not even the best part, Richard. She pulled a small evidence bag from her coat. Inside was a diamond bracelet, tarnished, dusty, but unmistakable. You bought this for Eliza on your 5th anniversary, she said. She wore it the night you killed her. Richard stared at it. He remembered fastening the clasp himself, her wrist delicate in his hands. He remembered how it had caught the candlelight. He remembered seeing it again, still on her, as he wrapped her body. We started excavation 3 days ago, Sarah continued. Quietly, carefully. The surface was untouched, just like you left it. But 6 feet down, we have her remains, Carter said. Confirmed by DNA and the forensic details. They tell the story you've been trying to hide. The hyoid bone was fractured, Sarah said coldly. Manual strangulation, defensive wounds on her hands, and your skin under her fingernails. Evidence that somehow never made it into the official reports back then. Richard's vision blurred. The room tilted. His world, his carefully constructed life, collapsed inward. Why now? He whispered. Why wait 11 years? Because I wanted you to suffer, Sarah said, voice like glass. To feel safe. To believe you'd gotten away with it. To watch your perfect little world grow roots. And then I wanted to rip it apart. Piece by piece. She nodded at the recorder on the table. Everything you've said over the last week is on there. Your visits to the burial site, your reactions, the things you let slip, but I wanted more. I wanted this. Her voice hardened. I wanted you to say it, to admit you murdered my sister. Richard looked between them. Carter, Sarah, the door. No way out. Only facts, only faces. If this is entrapment, it's not entrapment if you speak freely. Carter interrupted. No one's forcing anything. But we don't need a confession, we already have enough. Sarah's eyes locked onto his. Eliza's eyes. Did you know she was pregnant when you killed her? She asked softly. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. She was 8 weeks pregnant, Sarah said, each word cutting like a scalpel. She was going to tell you that night. Not that it would have mattered. She was still leaving you. But you didn't. Just kill my sister, Richard. You killed your own child. Something inside him cracked. All the careful lies, the rehearsed justifications, the years spent convincing himself it hadn't been as bad as it was. None of it could hold against that truth. She said she knew about the missing investor funds. He muttered, voice faint, almost broken. Said she'd testify, said she'd ruin me. Everything I'd built, everything, I couldn't let it fall apart. Sarah didn't move. Her expression was still, blank. But her eyes locked onto him, holding him there. So what did you do? Richard? She asked. I put my hands around her throat. His voice was flat now, mechanical, detached. I squeezed until she stopped fighting, until she stopped breathing. He paused, blinking as if waking from a long dream. I didn't mean to. He swallowed. No, that's a lie. I meant to. I knew exactly what I was doing. He looked up, eyes hollow, face pale. I killed her. I wrapped her in the rug from our dining room and drove to the construction site. I buried her. Then I went home. I called Marcus, told him to bring bleach. The room went quiet. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Carter stood. Wordlessly, he reached into his jacket for the cuffs. Richard Parker, he said. You are under arrest for the murder of Eliza Parker. You have the right to remain silent. As the words spilled into the air, Sarah didn't blink. Tears slid down her face, slow and soundless, carving paths over skin reshaped to mimic the sister she'd lost. A face that had become her sharpest. Blade, a disguise that had cost her everything. Richard didn't resist. He offered his wrists, almost grateful, because now, finally, it was over. The haunting hadn't come from Eliza. It had come from truth, patient, inevitable. Later, Sarah stood alone at her sister's grave, now marked and quiet. White lilies lay across the headstone, their petals still from the breeze. The storm of attention, the headlines, the interviews, the whispers about the woman who became her dead sister, was fading. It's done, she whispered. Her fingers brushed the face she wore, a face she had chosen to carry. The district attorney had asked if she would reverse the surgeries. Go back to being Sarah Morgan. But Sarah hadn't known how to answer. For 11 years, she hadn't just worn Eliza's face. She'd lived in her memories, spoken in her voice, walked in her footsteps. Her own reflection had become foreign. She opened a small mirror, staring into it. Behind the familiar angles and reconstructed lines were eyes that still belonged to her, eyes that had endured, eyes that had seen what no one else had and had refused to forget. She set the mirror down at the base of the grave. This face, neither fully Sarah nor Eliza, was what remained. A person built from grief, patience, and the slow burn of justice. As she turned to leave, her gaze landed on the silver locket half buried in the fresh earth. The one she had left to rattle Richard. She picked it up. Inside were 2 faded photographs, her parents smiling. A relic she'd clung to when she'd needed to remember why she couldn't stop. She slipped it over her neck, the weight familiar. She would never again be Sarah Morgan. And she wasn't Eliza Parker. She was what was left when justice came too late. What remains of a woman who gave everything to bring the truth to light. She walked away in silence, leaving behind the mirror that had once held 2 sisters in one face, the last witness to a murder almost buried forever. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more disturbing true crime stories. Leave your thoughts and theories in the comments below.